The gunman, Saeed Farouk, apparently was radicalized and was in communication with international terrorism subjects. I want to discuss this now with Hugh Hewitt. He's the host of the Hugh Hewitt Show, and Nicholas Kristof, columnist for the New York Times. It's good to have both of you here tonight, gentlemen. I'm going to start with you, Nick, because just before Thanksgiving, you were talking about radicalized terrorists. You and I were talking about radicalized terrorists in Paris, and you said it's only a matter of time before it's here. Is this it?
You know, look, too soon to be fully clear. First reports are always wrong, but certainly there are reasons to be very concerned this time. And in any case, it is going to happen. It's something that is kind of inevitable, and that we simply have to do our best to guard against. You
say it's too soon to. Do you think it's terror, or you said it's too soon to?
I'm trying to avoid being pinned down a little bit on that, just because in journalism, one of the things you always learn is that first reports are always wrong.
All right, let's turn to Hugh now, because Hugh, even though the FBI, they're not giving their motive yet, but you're pretty certain that this is terror.
These are terrorists, and I talk knowing that probably watching us at this moment are the children and the loved ones of the 14 dead and the 21 wounded. And I think we owe it to them to be very crystal clear, as we did after 9/11, that their parents or their loved ones were victims of terrorists, probably Islamist terror, almost certainly Islamist terror. And tonight in the Los Angeles Times, a senior law enforcement official, the article just went up, you wouldn't have had a chance to read it, Don, said they are now worried about a deeper matrix of terror in San Bernardino County, based upon the evidence they have gathered thus far. So I think we have to see what we see and listen very carefully, and it is quite clear to me, and I think probably to most of America, these were terrorists. It was not a issue of gun control. It's not a loner. It's not a schizophrenic person with access to weaponry. These were terrorists.
If you were listening to my last guest, one of my last guests, he said he was analyzing the evidence, looking at some of the pipe bombs and some of the materials used, and he said he was quite certain from this. Obviously, they were inspired from Inspire magazine, he said, and he believes that there are definitely more people involved. So it does sort of give credence to what you just said about what you just read, Hugh.
Yeah, well, I was listening to the interview. It was fascinating. And the experts, and we were talking before break about Lawrence Wright and the looming tower, and I would also mention Mike Morell and the Great War of our time. People who read this and study this and live it constantly hesitate to say what is obvious to them. Bob Baer's been on the program quite a lot on CNN today. And so I know Nick Kristof wants to be cautious. I'm a commentator. I'm not reporting facts. I'm coming to conclusions like lawyers do. And all the evidence says, look with your eyes, listen with your ears. These are terrorists. Let's act accordingly.
And that is a very important distinction, that one is a journalist and one is a commentator, and people often get the two confused. As a journalist, you want more facts, which people would understand. As a commentator, Hugh, you're free to say exactly how you feel, however the facts may lay out. But listen, I want to talk to you guys about this because some of the neighbors said they didn't want to report to police some activity that they thought might be suspicious because they didn't want to be perceived as profiling someone. Do you think is that a concern for you?
I mean, that's been a real problem. The same thing was said in Paris, and the same thing is true here.
So then what gives in? Because people are afraid to do that because they're afraid of being, Islamophobic in some sense, because they are saying this is suspicious. We always hear, if you see something, say something.
Yeah, and we've had something of the same problem in Minneapolis with Somali communities and trying to get people within the community to report suspicious behaviors. And it's an uphill struggle, but it's something that it has to be part of law enforcement, not just to crack down, but also to maintain this kind of outreach and members of the community in turn to respond.
Hey, Hugh, is this PC run amok, you think?
Yeah, this is a very terrible replay of Major Hassan, who gave a PowerPoint presentation that basically talked about terrorism, and everyone in the room was uncomfortable, and what happened, he was promoted and sent out to Fort Hood. It is not just neighbors not wanting to turn in neighbors. There's a self-censorship in America because of fear, and I read it tonight in the Wall Street Journal essay, or reporting, that people don't want to be pegged as bigots, and they're not bigots if they are concerned about unusual activity. I don't know how you can miss an arsenal being built in the garage next door. I don't know how you can miss the behavior of something like that with people coming and going. But they did, and then one of the neighbors said they just didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to get pegged as an Islamophobe. Nobody wants to be known as a bigot, and that is certainly understandable. But this fountainhead of jihadism, which is coming out of ISIS land and that has spread to Paris and to London and across the globe, and now into San Bernardino, and I've been in that building. I've done a lot of work in San Bernardino County. Southern California has a huge problem of terror, suspect, and linkage. And it's not just Southern California. People have to open their eyes. The jihad is here.
Let me push back a little bit if I can. You know, I think it's too early to fully understand what the lessons learned are from San Bernardino, and we'll learn that in the coming days. I do think that there are, you know, there is this, the larger problem isn't just what happened in San Bernardino. It's not just what happened in Colorado at Planned Parenthood. It is this larger problem of 92 people on average dying a day of gun violence. And that is something that I think we do have some ideas of what we can address. And that is something where I think guns and mental health are both, you know, part of the solution.
Hold your thought, Hugh. We're going to get it right after this break. Back now with Hugh Hewitt and Nicholas Kristof. So I want to put up, this is a cover last night from the Daily News that we put up saying God isn't fixing this when we were talking about the people running for president and the Speaker of the House. They say asking people for prayers. And, you know, after I studied it more, I did think that this was a bit harsh and it mocked people for praying. There's nothing wrong with praying. And everyone who comes on says, you know what, my faith is getting me through this. A harsh cover. Check this one out. This is from the new cover that will come out tomorrow. He's a terrorist and has, you know, Farouk up there, and then it has Dylan Roof and some of the terrorists, you know, recent terrorists, Adam Lanza, but then it has the head of the NRA as well. A quick response from you, Hugh.
The First Amendment is as absolute as the Second Amendment, Don. If they want to be idiots at various newspapers, they're allowed to be idiots. If they want to make absurdly slanderous comments about people, they are protected. I wouldn't have it any other way, but I would point out that they've offended most of America when they mocked prayer. Romans 12:15 says, mourn with those who mourn, not mock those who are grieving.
What do you think, Nicholas?
I mean, I think it's a little much to call the NRA terrorists. I certainly disagree profoundly with what they do, but there is a distinction.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your new column. This is your new piece in New York Times, and it says, on guns, we're not even trying. On guns, we're not even trying. I see a lot of things that we've discussed here before, regulating guns like we do cars, universal background checks. There's something new, though. You say that Ronald Reagan would argue for gun control. Explain that.
Well, he did argue for controlling guns. In fact, when he was governor of California, he signed a bill into law for a 2-week waiting period to buy handguns. And, you know,
he wrote an op-ed, right?
He wrote an op-ed for the New York Times.
You can put it up. We won't read it, but here it is.
Advocating the Brady bill. You know, I think that we have to remember that every afternoon, more people die from guns than died in San Bernardino. And it's very unclear what can prevent any incident. Maybe that no policy could have prevented, no gun policy, no mental health policy could prevent San Bernardino. There are steps that can prevent some of these other killings.
Hugh Hewitt, you know, I don't see any of the Republican candidates making pleas for gun control. Are you going to tell me that Ronald Reagan was wrong?
I'm going to tell you that placebo proposals do not do anyone any good. I heard Congressman Adam Schiff today say to Wolf Blitzer on this station, we should have universal background checks, we ought to have magazine clip checks, even though they wouldn't have had anything to do with yesterday. That's using a crisis and a tragedy and an atrocity today to advance a policy proposal that's not connected to the news of the day. I think that is despicable. I think the discussion about guns has a time and a place. I do not believe that anything Nick is advocating stopped any of the last 15 major atrocities, and that's research based on the Minnesota Gun Owners Alliance. So any policy proposal short of confiscation really doesn't do anything, and I don't hear Mrs. Clinton in her tweets, Nick in his column, or anyone arguing for confiscation. I wish people would be specific, not general, and I wish they would avoid policy proposals that are just placebos so that we could actually debate. I don't want the Republican presidential candidates going down these rabbit holes. That's not where their party is. That's not where America is.
Go ahead.
Sure. You know, right now 40% of guns are acquired without background checks. There's overwhelming support, even from gun owners, for those background checks. We do have some evidence from different state actions. I mean, Alaska has approximately 7 times the gun death rate of states like Massachusetts or Hawaii that have tighter gun regulations, because Alaska has virtually no gun regulations. There is some evidence that some steps, like preventing people who are subject to domestic violence restraining orders, people who've had problems with alcohol and violence, limiting their access to weapons, providing universal background checks, is going to some degree, at the margin, reduce the toll of violence.
All right. That's going to have to be the last word. Hugh Hewitt, Nicholas Kristof. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. We'll be right back.